Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and today we are going to be doing the chapter, this is going to be this guy, so the Dar Islam Europe. So this is basically, sorry, I'm a bit too close, this is basically chapter 3, essentially, but it's just the Dar Islam one, although it's not exactly chapter 3, I think it's chapter 1 and 2, this is part 2, so let's go ahead and get started before we waste any more time. Middle Eastern cultural traditions, Islam. The world historical... we're starting on page 33, and we're going to go to 38 for this first reading. Cool. Alright, so Middle Eastern cultural traditions, Islam. The world historical significance of Islam, the third world region in the Abrahamic family of faiths, has been enormous. It thrust the previously marginal and largely nomadic Arabs into a central role in world history, for it was among them and in their language that the newest of the world's major religions was born during the 7th century CE. Its emergence was accompanied by a rapid creation of a huge empire that stretched from Spain to India, but the religion of Islam reached beyond that empire, to both East and West Africa, to India, and to Central and Southeast Asia. Within the Arab Empire and beyond it, a new and innovative civilization took shape, drawing on Arab, Persian, Turkic, and Greco-Roman, South Asian, and African cultures. It was known as Dar al-Islam, the house or the abode of Islam. The Arabia from which Islam emerged was a land of pastoral people, herding their sheep and camels, but it also contained some regions of settled agricultural communities and sophisticated commercial sites such as Mecca, which were linked to long-distance trading routes. Arabia was located on the periphery of two established and rival civilizations of that time, the Byzantine Empire, heir to the Roman world, and the Sassanid Empire, heir to the imperial traditions of Persia. Many Jews and Christians lived among the Arabs, and their monotheistic ideas became widely known. The catalyst for emergence of Islam was a single individual, Muhammad ibn Abdullah, a trader from Mecca. A highly reflective man who was deeply troubled by the religious corruption and social inequalities of Mecca. He often undertook periods of withdrawal and meditation in the arid mountains outside the city. There, Muhammad had a powerful, overwhelming religious experience that left him convinced, albeit reluctantly, that he was Allah's messenger to the Arabs, commissioned to bring them to a scripture in their own language. According to Muslim tradition, the revelation began in 610 and continued periodically over the next 20 years. Those revelations were recorded in the Quran and became the sacred scriptures of Islam, which to this day most Muslims regard as the very words of God and the core of their faith. It was a revolutionary message that Muhammad conveyed. Religiously, it presented Allah, the Arabic word for God, as the sole divine being, the all-powerful creator, thus challenging the highly polytheistic religions of the Arabs. In its exalted conception of deity, Muhammad's revelations drew heavily on traditions of Jewish and Christian monotheism. As the messenger of God, Muhammad presented himself in the line of earlier prophets, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and many others. He was the last, the seal of prophets, bearing God's final revelations to humankind. Islam was socially revolutionary as well. Over and over again, the Quran denounced the prevailing social practices of an increasingly prosperous Mecca. The hoarding of wealth, the exploitation of the poor, the charging of high rates and interest on loans, corrupt business deals, the abuse of women, and the neglect of widows and orphans. Like the Jewish prophets of the Hebrew Scriptures, the Quran demanded social justice and laid out a prescription for its implementation. Finally, Islam was politically revolutionary because the Quran challenged the entire tribunal and clan structure of Arab society, which was so prone to war, feuding, and violence. The just and moral society of Islam was the Ummah, the community of all believers, which replaced the tribal, ethnic, and racial identities. In this community, women too had an honored and spiritually equal place. The believers, men and women, are protectors of one another, declare the Quran. The Ummah, then, was to be a new and just community, bound by common belief rather than by territory, language, or tribe. Like Jesus, Muhammad was threatening to establish authorities in Mecca, and he was forced to leave. But unlike Jesus, he was in a position to resist, for there was no overwhelming force such as the Roman Empire to contend with. So he gathered an army and by 630 CE, he had largely unified Arabia under the banner of Islam. Thus, Islam began its history as a new state, while Christianity was at odds with the Roman state for over 3 centuries. That state soon became a huge empire as Arab armies took the offensive after Muhammad's death in 632 CE. In many places, conversion to Islam soon followed. In Persia, for example, some 80% of the population had made a transition to a Muslim religious identity by 900, and Persian culture became highly prestigious and influential within the Islamic world. One of the early rulers of this Arab empire observed, "The Persians ruled for thousands of years and did not need us Arabs even for a day. We have been ruling them for 1 or 2 centuries and cannot do without them for an hour." Map. But the idea of unified Muslim community, so important to Muhammad, proved difficult to realize as conquest and conversion vastly enlarged the Islamic world. Political conflict over who should succeed Muhammad led to a civil war and to an enduring division between what became known as the Sunni and Shia branches of Islam. It became as purely political conflict, but acquired over time a deeper significance. For much of early Islamic history, Shia Muslims saw themselves as a minority opposition within Islam. They felt that history had taken a wrong turn and that they were the defenders of the oppressed, the critics and opponents of privilege and power, while the Sunnis were advocates of the established order. Other conflicts arose among Arab clans or factions, between Arabs and non-Arabs, and between privileged and wealthy rulers and their less fortunate subjects. After 900 or so, any political unity that Islamic civilization had earlier enjoyed had vanished. And yet there was... I'm only supposed to go to 38. And yet there was so much that bound the Islamic world together, culturally if not politically. The rise of Islam had generated a transcontinental civilization, embracing at least parts of virtually every other civilization in Afro-Eurasian hemisphere. Yeah, it was in that sense a global civilization, although the Americas, of course, were not involved. The Quran, universal respect for Muhammad, common religious texts, a ritual prayer five times a day, and the required pilgrimage to Mecca, all of this was common to many people of the Islamic world. No group was more important in transmission of those beliefs and practices than the Ummah. These learned scholars served as judges, interpreters, administrators, prayer leaders, and reciters of the Quran, but especially as preservers and the teachers of the Sharia or Islamic law. In their homes, mosques, shrines, and Quranic schools, the Ummah passed on the core teachings of the faith. Beginning in the 11th century, formal colleges called madrasas offered more advanced instruction in the Quran and the sayings of Muhammad, grammar and rhetoric, sometimes philosophy, theology, mathematics, and medicine, and above all else, law. Teaching was informal, mostly oral, and involved much memorization of texts. It was also largely conservative, seeking to preserve an established body of Islamic learning. The Ummah were an international elite, and the system of education they created bound together an immense and diverse civilization. Common texts were shared widely across the world of Islam. Students and teachers alike traveled great distances in search of the most learned scholars. From Indonesia to West Africa, educated Muslims inhabited a widely shared tradition. Paralleling the educational network of the Ummah were the emerging religious orders, of the Sufis, who had a quite different understanding of Islam, for they viewed the worldly success of Islamic civilization as a distraction and deviation from the pure spirituality of Muhammad's time. Emerging strongly by 1000, Sufis represented Islam's mystical dimension, in that they sought a direct and personal experience of the divine. Through renunciation of the material world, meditation on the words of the Quran, chanting of the names of God, and use of music and dance, and the veneration of Muhammad and various saints, adherents of Sufism pursued an interior life, seeking to tame the ego and achieve spiritual union with Allah. Water break. This mystical tendency in Islamic practice, which became widely popular by the 9th and 10th centuries, was at times sharply critical of the more scholarly and the legalistic practitioners of the Sharia. To Sufis, the established teachings about the law and correct behavior, while useful for daily living, did little to bring the believer into the presence of God. Furthermore, Sufis felt that many of the Ummah had been compromised by their association with worldly and corrupt governments. Sufis therefore often chartered their own course to God, implicitly challenging the religious authority of the Ummah. For many centuries, roughly 1,100 to 1800s, Sufism was central to mainstream Islam, and many, perhaps most, Muslims affiliated with one or another Sufi organization, making use of its spiritual practices. Nonetheless, differences in emphasis about the essential meaning of Islam remained an element of tension and sometimes discord within the Muslim world. In the 12th and 13th centuries, Sufis began to organize in a variety of larger associations, some limited to particular religions and others with chapters throughout the Islamic world. Sufi orders were especially significant in the frontier regions of Islam because they followed conquering armies or traders into Central and Southeast Asia, India, Anatolia, and parts of Africa and elsewhere. Their devotional teachings, modest ways of living, and reputation for supernatural powers gained a hearing for the new faith. Their emphasis on personal experience of the divine rather than on law allowed Sufis to accommodate elements of local belief and veneration and practice, and encourage the growth of popular or blended Islam. The veneration of deceased Sufi saints or friends of God, particularly at their tombs, created sacred places that enabled Islam to take root in many places despite its foreign origins. But that flexibility also often earned Sufi practitioners the enmity of the Ummah, who were sharply critical of any deviations of the Sharia. All right, that was 33 through 38. Now we have to read 30. Let's just read 30 through 33 because that's what's up next. So that's going to be this little part right here. I don't even know what this is. I'm not going to read all that, but it's super short. All right. So we're starting on page 30. Middle Eastern cultural traditions, Judaism and Christianity. From the Middle Eastern lands of what are now Israel/Palestine and Arabia emerged three religious traditions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, often known as the Abrahamic faith, because all of them revered the biblical character called Abraham. Amid amid the proliferation of of gods and spirits that had long characterized religious life throughout the ancient world, Jews, Christians, and Muslims alike affirmed a distinctly monotheistic faith. This idea of a single supreme deity or divine presence, the sole source of all life and being, was a radical cultural innovation, and it created the possibility of a universal religion, open to all humankind, but it could also mean an exclusive and intolerant faith. The earliest of these traditions was Judaism, born among the Hebrews, also known as Jews or Jewish people. They constituted a smaller society in comparison with the large empires of Assyrians, Babylonians, or Egyptians. Unlike the peoples of ancient Mesopotamia, India, Greece, and elsewhere, all of who populated the invisible realm with numerous gods and goddesses, Jews found in their God, whose name they were reluctant to pronounce because of its sacredness, a powerful and jealous deity who demanded their exclusive loyalty. Thou shalt not have no other gods before me. This was the first of the 10 Commandments. Over time, this god had evolved into a lofty, transcendent deity of utter holiness and purity, but the Jews also experienced their God as a divine person, accessible and available to his people, not remote or far away. Furthermore, for some, he was transformed from a god of war who ordered his people to utterly destroy the original inhabitants of the promised land, to a god of social justice and compassion for the poor and the marginalized, especially in the passionate pronouncements of Jewish prophets such as Isaiah, Amos, and Jeremiah. Here was a distinctive conception of the divine, singular, transcendent, personal, revealed in the natural order, engaged in history, and demanding social justice and moral righteousness above sacrifices and rituals. This outlook decisively shaped those more widespread religions of Christianity and Islam, and thus gave essentially Jewish religious thinking a worldwide expression. Christianity began in a distinctly Jewish cultural setting. In the remote province of Judea, which was incorporated into the Roman Empire, a young Jewish craftsman or builder called Jesus of Nazareth began a brief career of teaching and healing before he got in trouble with local authorities and was executed. In one of the history's most unlikely stories, the life and the teachings of that obscure man, barely noted in the historical records at the time, became the basis of the world's most widely practiced religion. In his short life, Jesus was a wisdom teacher, challenging the conventional values of his time, urging the renunciation of wealth and self-seeking, and emphasizing the supreme importance of love and compassion as the basis for a moral life. In his famous Sermon on the Mount, Jesus told his followers to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Jesus inherited from his Jewish tradition an intense devotion to a single personal deity with whom he was on intimate terms, referring to him as Abba, Father. And he gained a reputation as a healer and miracle worker. Furthermore, Jesus' teachings had a sharp social and political edge, as he spoke clearly on behalf of the poor and the oppressed, directly criticized the hypocrisies of the powerful, and deliberately associated with lepers, adulterous women, and tax collectors, all of whom were regarded as impure. His teachings galvanized many of his followers into a social movement that was so antagonized and threatened both Jewish and Roman authorities that he was crucified as a political rebel. Jesus had not intended to establish a new religion, but rather revitalize his Jewish tradition. Nonetheless, Christianity soon emerged as a separate faith. Its transformation from a small Jewish sect to a world religion began with St. Paul, an early convert whose missionary journeys in the Eastern Roman Empire led to the founding of small Christian communities that included non-Jews. The good news of Jesus, Paul argued, was for everyone, Jews and non-Jews alike. This inclusive message was one of the attractions of the new faith, as it spread very gradually within the Roman Empire during the several centuries after Jesus' death. In the Roman world, the strangest and most offensive feature of the new faith was its exclusive monotheism and its antagonism to all other supernatural powers, particularly the cult of the emperors. Christians' denial of these other gods caused them to be tagged as atheists, and was one of the reasons behind the empire's intermittent persecution of Christians during the first 3 centuries of the Common Era. All of that ended with Emperor Constantine's conversion in the early 4th century and the proclamation of Christianity as the state religion in 380 CE. About the same time, the new faith also gained the official status in Armenia, located in South Caucasus region of East Turkey and Aksum, an African state in what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea. In fact, during the first 6 centuries of the Christian era, most followers of Jesus lived in the Middle East and northern and northeastern Africa, with small communities in India and China as well. As Christianity spread within the Roman Empire and beyond, it developed an elaborate organization with patriarchs, bishops, and priests, all men, replacing the house churches of the early years, in which women played a more prominent part. The emerging Christian movement, however, was anything but unified. Its immense geographic reach, accompanied by inevitable differences in language, culture, and political regime, ensured that a single focus for Christian belief and practice was difficult to achieve. Eventually, separate church organizations emerged in the eastern and western regions of the Roman Empire, as well as in Egypt, Syria, Persia, Armenia, Ethiopia, and southern India, some of which were accompanied by sharp differences in doctrine. The Bishop of Rome gradually emerged as the dominant leader, or pope, of the church in the western half of the empire, but his authority was sharply contested in the east. This division was contributed to the later split between the Latin and Roman Catholic, and the Greek and Eastern Orthodox branches of Christendom, a division that continues to be present to the present. Thus, by 600 or so, the Christian world was not only geographically extensive, but also politically and theologically very diverse and highly fragmented. All right, and then next we're going to read pages 63 through 69. So let's go ahead and just head over to there. Oh my gosh, I was supposed to read this page. Oh my gosh. Okay. No, it doesn't say anything about reading this. Alright, I need to go to page, hello? Stop. I need to go to page 63. Oh, brother. Oh, wait, can I just click on this? 63. There we go. That looks like it'll work, yep. Although that's a bit cut off. Hello. Wait, we read this, no? Or we read that, but we didn't. Where's page 63? Because it says it's right here, but it doesn't. That doesn't look like a whole thing. Like. And I remember reading this, but we didn't read page 63. So let's just read to, like, look. Okay, I'm sorry if this is like weird, but it just kind of is what it is. Well, it says the worlds of Islam fragmented and expanding. So let's look up that instead of just going to page 63. So sorry. The worlds of Islam. There we go. Wait, didn't... Anyways, alright. The world of Islam fragmented and expanding. Where is this? So it's actually, guess what? It's on a different page. That's not the correct page. Get that? Very funny, actually. Hilarious. Just chugging through my water right now. Alright, we have to read from here to page 80. You have got to be joking me, dude. Okay. Alright. By around 1200, a dynamic and expanding Islamic world was firmly established along a vast and continuous expanse of Afro-Eurasia, stretching from Spain and Morocco in the west to northern India in the east, with its heartland in the Middle East and Egypt, with the exception of India. Goodness gracious. With the exception of India, these territories had largely been incorporated into the Islamic world through the construction of the Arab Empire in the century and a half following Muhammad's death in 632. Even if wide-scale conversion of the subject peoples took considerably longer. From around 1000, a second major expansion by conquest occurred into India, Anatolia, and later the Balkans. This time spearheaded by Turkey-speaking groups who had recently converted to the Muslim faith. By 1200, Islam was also spreading far beyond these regions of conquest into Southeast and Central Asia and sub-Saharan Africa through the activities of Muslim. Yeah. Oh my gosh, dude, I genuinely don't want to do this. Where was I? Even if wide-scale conversion of this... and then a second major expansion by conquest occurred into India, Anatolia, and later the Balkans. This time spearheaded by Turkic-speaking groups who had recently converted to the Muslim faith. By 1200, Islam was also spreading far beyond these regions of conquest into Southeast and Central Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa through the activities of Muslim merchants and missionaries. Between 1200 and 1450, the Arab Empire was politically fragmented, but Islamic culture and religion remained vibrant in the Middle East, while cultural encounters with established Hindu and Christian civilizations occurred on the frontiers of this Islamic heartland in India and Spain. Okay. The Islamic heartland. By 1200, the Abbasid Caliphate, an Arab dynasty that had ruled the Islamic world in theory, if not practice, since 750, was a shadow of its former self. At the start of their rule, the Abbasids built a splendid new capital in Baghdad, from which the dynasty presided over a flourishing and prosperous Islamic civilization. But for all its accomplishments, the Abbasid dynasty's political grip on the vast Arab empire slipped quickly away. Beginning in the mid-9th century, many local governors or military commanders asserted the autonomy of their regions, while still giving formal allegiance to the Caliph in Baghdad. A major turning point in both the political and cultural history of the Islamic Middle East was the arrival, starting around 1000, of Turkic-speaking pastoralists from the steppes of Central Asia into fragmenting political landscapes of the Abbasid Empire. Dude, stop changing the name. If it's Abbasid Caliphate, call it Abbasid Caliphate, but it's Abbasid Empire, call it Abbasid Empire. Don't just keep switching names. At first, they served as slave soldiers within the Abbasid Caliphate. Are you dead serious right now? At first, they served as slave soldiers within the Abbasid Caliphate, and then, as the Caliphate declined, they increasingly took political and military power for themselves. In the Seljuk Turkic Empire of the 11th and 12th centuries, for instance, rulers began to claim the Muslim title of Sultan, rather than the Turkic Khagan, as they became major players in the Islamic Middle East. Even as their political power grew, the Turks themselves were experiencing a major... Yeah, see, like, the Turks were themselves experiencing... Like, dude, just write normally. The Turks were themselves were, not the Turks were themselves. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Gosh. We genuinely do not know how to write, do we? Okay, I gotta stop before I say something bad, right? Because maybe the reason why I can't read is not because of my reading ability, but maybe it's because this book doesn't make any sense to read. Dude, I'm sorry. This should be a studying video. I shouldn't be crashing out like this. Apologies. Let's see. Even as their political power grew, the Turks themselves were experiencing a major turning point in their history, as ever more groups of Turkic-speaking warriors converted to Islam between the 10th and 14th centuries. This extended process represented a major expansion of faith and launched the Turks into a new role as a major sustainer of Islam and carried of the faith into new regions. Into new regions, not into. By 1200, the Islamic heartland had fractured politically into a series of sultanates, many ruled by Persian or Turkish military dynasties. In the 13th century, the Mongols, another pastoral people, invaded the region, put an official end to the Abbasid Caliphate in 1258, and ruled much of Persia for a time. In the long run, though, it was the Ottoman Empire, a creation of one of the many Turkic warrior groups that had migrated into Anatolia, that brought greater long-term political unity to the Islamic Middle East and North Africa. By the mid-15th century, the Ottoman Turks had already carved out a state that encompassed much of the Anatolian Peninsula and had pushed deep into the southeastern Europe, the Balkans, acquiring in the process a substantial Christian population and a capital city in Constantinople. During the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire extended much of its control. Extended much of its control of the Middle East, Egypt, coastal North Africa, the lands surrounding the Black Sea, and even farther into Eastern Europe. This impressive and enduring new empire lasted in one form or another from the 14th century to the early 20th century. Wow. The Ottoman Empire was a state... I honestly don't know. The Ottoman Empire was a state of enormous significance in the world of the 15th century and beyond. In its huge territory, long duration, incorporation of many diverse peoples, and economic and cultural sophistication, it was one of the great empires of world history. In the 15th century, only Ming Dynasty China and the Incas matched it in terms of power, wealth, and splendor. That empire represented the emergence of the Turks as the dominant people of the Islamic world, ruling now over many Arabs, who had initiated this new faith more than 800 years before. In adding Caliph, successor to the Prophet, to their other titles, Ottoman sultans claimed the legacy of their earlier Abbasid Empire. They sought to bring a renewed unity to the Islamic world, while also serving as a protector of the faith and the strong sword of Islam. Along with the Safavid dynasty that emerged to the east in Persia in the 16th century, the Ottomans brought to the Islamic Middle East a greater measure of political coherence, military power, economic prosperity, and cultural brilliance than it had known since the early centuries of Islam. Do we read this one? I don't know. I think we do. Does it end with this 69? Yeah. Cool. All right. Cultural. Let me drink some water. Cultural encounters in India and Spain. Even as Turkish political and cultural influence increased in the Islamic heartland, Turkic-speaking warrior groups were also spreading the Muslim faith through the conquest into India, initiating an enduring encounter with an ancient Hindu civilization. Beginning around 1000, those conquests gave rise to a series of Islamic regimes that governed much of India into the 19th century. The early centuries of this encounter were violent indeed, as the invaders smashed Hindu and Buddhist temples and carried off vast quantities of Indian treasure. With the establishment of the Sultan in Delhi in 1206, Turkic rule became more systematic, although the Turks' small number and international conflicts allowed only a very modest penetration of Indian society. In the centuries that followed, substantial Muslim communities emerged in northern India, particularly in the regions less tightly integrated into the dominant Hindu culture. Aside from the spiritual attraction of the faith, the egalitarian aspects of Islam attracted some disillusioned Buddhists, low-caste Hindus, and untouchables, people considered beneath even the lowest caste, along with those just beginning to make a transition to settled agriculture. Others benefited from converting to Islam by avoiding the tax imposed on non-Muslims. Muslim holy men, known as the Sufis, were particularly important in facilitating conversion, for India had always valued God-filled men who were detached from worldly affairs. Unlike the earlier experience of Islam in the Middle East and North Africa, where it rapidly became the dominant faith, in India it was never able to claim more than 20 to 25% of the population. Furthermore, Muslim communities were especially concentrated in the Punjab and Sindh regions of northwestern India and in Bengal to the east. The core regions of Hindu culture in the northern Indian plain were not seriously challenged by the new faith, despite centuries of Muslim rule. Muslims usually live quiet, separate lives and remaining a distinctive minority within an ancient Indian civilization, which now they've largely governed, but which they proved unable to completely transform. Dang it. Where was I? These religious and cultural boundaries proved permeable in at least some contexts. Many prominent Hindus, for instance, willingly served in the political and military structures of a Muslim-ruled India. Furthermore, to the south, well beyond the boundaries of the Delhi Sultanate and its successors, several Hindu states flourished. Perhaps the most impressive was the powerful empire, which at its height controlled nearly all of southern India from a thriving capital city of perhaps 500,000 people. I think it says Vijayanagar. Chat. Deadass. We have to cut out that. We have to cut that out the video. I'm not even kidding. And you know what's funny is that I'm gonna leave that part into where I just said we have to cut that out the video but I'm gonna cut the other part out. Wait, I can't cut anything though. Shit. What do I do? I read. That's what I do. I read. That's what I'm best at. I'm really good at reading. Read! From a thriving capital city of perhaps 500,000 people, described by one 16th century European visitor as the best provided city in the world, as large as Rome and very beautiful to the sight, formed in part to resist Muslim incursions from the north. Empire was also a site of sustained and more peaceful Hindu-Muslim encounters. Muslim merchants were a prominent presence in many trading ports, and a scholar has recently described a Muslim district of the capital as being as vibrant as the Hindu precincts of the city. As in northern India, the Hindu faith predominated, but a permanent Muslim presence in the south festered an ongoing encounter between the two faiths and cultures. In the far west of Islamic world, Spain, called Al-Andalus by Muslims, was also the site of sustained cross-cultural encounter, this time with Christian Western Europe. But here, Muslims, Christians, and Jews mixed more freely than in India, even as periods of toleration fluctuated with persecution of other faiths. Conquered by Arab and Berber forces in the early 8th century, during the first wave of Islamic expansion, Muslim Spain became a vibrant city by the 900s. Its agricultural economy was the most prosperous in Europe during this time, and its capital of Cordoba was among the largest and most splendid cities in the world. Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike contributed to the brilliant high culture in which astronomy, medicine, the arts, architecture, and literature flourished. Furthermore, social relationships among upper-class members of different faiths were easy and frequent. By 1000, perhaps 75% of the population had converted to Islam. Many of the remaining Christians learned Arabic, veiled their women, stopped eating pork, appreciated the Arabic music and poetry, and sometimes married Muslims. During the reign of Abd al-Rahman III, freedom of worship was declared, as well as opportunity for all to rise in the bureaucracy of the state. But this so-called golden age of Muslim Spain was both limited and brief. Even assimilated or Arabized Christians remained religious infidels and second-class citizens in the eyes of their Muslim counterparts, and by the late 10th century, toleration began to erode. The Cordoba-based regime fragmented into numerous rival states. Warfare with the remaining Christian kingdom in northern Spain picked up in the 10th and 11th centuries, and more puritanical and rigid reforms of Islam entered Spain from North Africa. Under the rule of Al-Mansur, an official policy of tolerance turned to one of the overt persecutions against Christians, which now included the plundering of churches and seizing of their wealth. Although Al-Mansur employed many Christian mercenaries in his armies, social life also changed. Devout Muslims now avoided contact with Christians. Christian homes have been built lower than those of Muslims. Priests were forbidden to carry a cross or a Bible, lest they offend Muslim sensibilities, and Arabized Christians were permitted to live only in particular places. Thus, writes one of the scholars, the era of harmonious interaction between Muslim and Christian in Spain came to an end, replaced by intolerance, prejudice, and mutual suspicion. The intolerance intensified as the Christian conquest of Spain gained ground after 1200. The end came in 1492 when Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs of a unified Spain, took Granada, the last Muslim stronghold on the Iberian Peninsula. Despite initial promises to maintain the freedom of Muslims to worship, in the opening decades of the 16th century, the Spanish monarchy issued a series of edicts outlawing Islam in its various territories, forcing Muslims to choose between conversion or exile. Many Muslims were thus required to migrate, often to North Africa or the Ottoman Empire, along with some 200,000 Jews. Expelled from Spain because they too refused to convert. In the early 17th century, even Muslim converts to Christianity were likewise banished from Spain, and yet cultural interchange persisted for a time. The translation of Arab texts into Latin continued under Christian rule, while Christian churches and palaces were constructed on the sites of older mosques and incorporated Islamic artistic and architectural features. Thus, Spain, unlike most other regions incorporated into the Islamic world, experienced a religious reversal between 1200 and 1450 as Christian rule was reestablished and Islam was painfully eradicated from the Iberian Peninsula. In world historical terms, perhaps the chief significance of Muslim Spain was its role in making the rich heritage of Islamic learning available to Christian Europe. As a cross-cultural encounter, it is largely a one-way street. European scholars wanted the secular knowledge, Greek as well as Arab, that accumulated in the Islamic world. As they flocked to Spain to acquire it, the knowledge of philosophy, mathematics, medicine, optics, astronomy, botany, and more played a major role in making of a new European civilization in the 13th century and beyond. Muslim Spain remained only as a memory. Got it? Okay. Now we need to go to... Wait. Oh, no. Oh, wait. Number Middle Eastern cultural... Did we ever read that one? Middle Eastern cultural traditions? No. Okay. Okay. So we gotta go read Middle Eastern cultural traditions. Eastern cultural traditions. That's on page 30. It says here. Oh. Oh, we actually already read that. And then... The world's... Okay, so that's what that is. Okay. Of Islam... the worlds of Christendom. But not Western and European outward bound. So... Not... Resonance... So not this one. And not this one either. So, oh my gosh. Okay, he's kind of just... Yeah, no, so there's nothing... That's basically just saying don't read those end bits. Yeah, we have to read... I have to read all this, by the way. Have to. It's not even... It's a cool thing that we all have to do this, by the way. We all have to do this, apparently. At some point of our lives, we just have to sit here and just record into the microphone. Anyways, the worlds of Christendom. Much like the worlds of Islam, between 1200 and 1450, the worlds of Christendom were both spreading and contradicting. Since 600 CE, the Christian faith had expanded dramatically in Europe, even as it contracted sharply in Asia and Africa, where many had converted to Islam. The Byzantine Empire, or the Byzantium, for centuries had been the most sophisticated and powerful Christian empires and civilizations, had by 1200 entered a state of terminal decline. But even as this ancient Christian state disappeared, its religious, political, and cultural traditions profoundly influenced the Rus, an emerging civilization in Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, the trajectory of civilization in Western Europe traced an opposite path to that of the Byzantium. While civilization contracted in Western Europe as the Roman Empire collapsed, by 1200 that region was emerging as an especially dynamic, expansive, and innovative civilization, combining elements of Greco-Roman Christian past with the culture of Germanic and Celtic peoples to produce a distinctive hybrid or blended civilization. The Eastern Orthodox world, a declining Byzantium and the merging of Rus. Unlike most empires, Byzantium had no clear starting point. Its own leaders, as well as its neighbors and enemies, viewed it as simply a continuation of the Roman Empire. Right. I think this is after the Roman Empire fall. It initially encompassed large parts of Eastern Roman Empire, including Egypt, Greece, Syria, and Anatolia. Much that was late Roman, its roads, taxation system, military structures, centralized administration, imperial court laws, Christian church, persisted in Byzantium for many centuries. Like Song Dynasty China seeking to restore the glory of the earlier Han era, Byzantium consciously sought to preserve the legacy of classical Greco-German Greco-Roman civilization. Its well-fortified capital city of Constantinople, established in 330 CE, was a new Rome, and people referred to themselves as Romans. The rapid Islamic expansion in the 7th century resulted in the loss of Syria and Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa. Nonetheless, until roughly 1200, a more compact Byzantine Empire remained a major force in the eastern Mediterranean, controlling Greece and much of the Balkans, southern Eastern Europe, and Anatolia. From that territorial base, the empire's naval and merchant vessels were active in both Mediterranean and Black Seas. In its heyday, the Byzantine state was an impressive creation. Political authority remained tightly centralized in Constantinople, where the emperor claimed to govern all creation as God's worldly representative, styling himself as the sole ruler of the world. The imperial court tried to imitate the awesome grandeur of what it thought was God's heavenly court. Intimately tied to the Byzantine state was the Eastern Orthodox Church, a relationship that became known as the Caesaropapism. Unlike in Western Europe, where the Roman Catholic Church maintained some degree of independence from political authorities, in Byzantium, the emperor assumed something of the role of both Caesar, as head of the state, and the Pope, as head of the Church. Thus, he appointed the patriarch, or leader, of the Orthodox Church, sometimes made decisions about doctrine, called the Church Council into session, and generally treated the Church as a government department. The empire and the Church have a great unity and community, declared a 12th century patriarch. Indeed, they cannot be separated. Eastern Orthodox Christianity legitimated the supreme and absolute authority of the emperor, for he was a God-anointed ruler, a reflection of the glory of God on earth. It also provided a cultural identity for the empire's subjects. Even more than being Roman, they were Orthodox or right-thinking Christians. Tensions between the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Roman Catholic Church, headed by the Pope in Rome, grew through time until in 1054, when representatives of both churches mutually excommunicated each other, declaring in effect that those in the opposing tradition were not genuine Christians. The Crusades, launched in 1095 by the Catholic Pope against the forces of Islam, made relations worse, especially when during the Fourth Crusade in 1204, Western forces seized Constantinople and ruled Byzantine for the next half-century. After this, the rupture of the world of Christendom proved irreparable. The most significant region of expansion for Orthodox Christianity around 1200 was among the Rus, Slavic peoples of what is now Ukraine and Western Russia. In this culturally diverse region, which also included Finnic and Baltic peoples as well as Viking traders, a modest state known as Kievan Rus, named after the most prominent city. Kiev emerged in the 19th century, loosely led by various princes. Rus was a society of slaves and freemen, privileged people and commoners, dominant men and subordinate women. This stratification marked it as a civilization in the making. In 988, a decisive turning point occurred. The growing interaction of Rus with the larger world-prompted Prince of Vladimir of the Cave to affiliate with the Eastern Orthodox faith of the Byzantine Empire. The prince was searching for a religion that would unify the diverse peoples of his region while linking Rus into a wider network of communication and exchange. As elsewhere in Europe, the coming of Christianity to Rus was a top-down development in which ordinary people followed the rules into the church. It was a slow process with elements of traditional religious sensibility lingering among those who defined themselves as Christians. Nonetheless, it was a fateful choice with long-term implications for Russian history, for it brought this fledgling civilization firmly into the world of the Orthodox Christianity, separating it from both of the realm of Islam and the Roman Catholic West. Like many new civilizations, Rus borrowed extensively from its older and more sophisticated Byzantine neighbor. Among these borrowings were Byzantine architectural styles, the Cyrillic alphabet based on its Greek counterpart, the extensive use of religious images known as icons, a monastic tradition stressing prayer and service, and political ideas of imperial control of the church, all of which became part of a transformed Rus. Orthodoxy also proved a more unified identity for this emerging civilization and religious legitimacy for its rulers. Wow, is this a painting? That's crazy. Is it? It is a painting. Gosh. Wait, is it? I don't know. But even as the Rus civilization emerged, Byzantine disappeared. For centuries, the Byzantine Empire showed remarkable resilience and capacity for revival even after destabilizing civil wars and devastating invasions by foreign neighbors. But after 1085, the empire entered a period of slow and ultimately terminal decline. Byzantine territory shrank, and owing to incursions by aggressive Western European powers, by Catholic crusaders, and by Turkic Muslim invaders. The end came in 1453 when the Turkic Ottoman Empire finally took Constantinople, bringing to an end an empire that had survived over 1,000 years. Yep. Are we supposed to read this? Yeah. A fragmented political landscape in Western Europe. The western half of European Christian world followed a rather different path from that of Byzantine Empire. In the first place, it was different religiously. For by 1200, most of the Western Europe had embraced Christianity in its distinctive Roman Catholic variant. The church had replaced some of the political, administrative, educational, and welfare functions of the now vanished Roman Empire. For aspiring kings and warlords, it offered the status of legitimacy of a civilized and literate religion that still bore something of a grandeur that was Rome. Nonetheless, for centuries, priests and bishops had warned their congregations against the worship of rivers, trees, mountains, and for many people, ancient gods. Monsters, trolls, and spirits still inhabited land. Until around 1000 CE, Western Christendom was distinctly on the margins of world history, partly because of its geographic location at the far western end of Eurasia's landmass. Thus, it was at a distance from the growing roots of the world trade by sea in the Indian Ocean and by land across the Silk Roads to China and sand roads to West Africa. Internally, Western Europe's geography made political unity difficult, for population centers were divided by mountain ranges and dense forests, as well as by 5 major peninsulas and 2 large islands, Britain and Ireland. However, its extensive coastlines and interior river systems facilitated exchange, while a moderate climate, plentiful rainfall, and fertile soils enabled a productive agriculture that could support a growing population. Unlike the large centralized states of Byzantine, the Islamic world and China, Unlike the large centralized states of Byzantine, the Islamic world, and China, this new European civilization never achieved political unity. In the political chaos of the 9th and 10th centuries, a highly fragmented and decentralized society, widely known as feudalism, emerged in a variety of local expressions and persisted in some regions into the 15th century. In thousands of independent, self-sufficient, and largely isolated landed estates of Maynard's power, political, economic, social, were exercised by a warrior elite of landowning lords. in a system known as manorialism. In the constant competition, lesser lords and knights swore allegiance to greater lords or kings and thus became their vassals, frequently receiving lands and plunder in return for military service. Some institutions, like monasteries, also became lords and manors, usually through donations. Such reciprocal ties between superior and subordinate were also apparent at the bottom of the social hierarchy, as Roman-style slavery gradually gave way to serfdom. Unlike slaves, serfs were not the personal properties of their masters, could not be arbitrarily thrown off their land, and were allowed to live in families. However, they were bound to their master's estates as peasant laborers and owed various payments and services to the lord of the manor. In return, the serf family received a small farm and such protection as the lord could provide. In a violent and insecure world, the only security available to many individuals or families lay in these communities, where ties to kin, manor, lord, and church constituted primary human loyalties. But after 1000, European political life had begun to crystallize into a system of competing states that had persisted into the 21st century. Many of the regions of the Western Europe during the 11th through the 13th centuries, monarchs gradually and painfully began to consolidate their authority, and outlines of the French, English, Spanish, Scandinavian, and other states began to appear, each with its own distinct language and culture. Royal courts and fledgling bureaucracies were established, and groups of professional administrators appeared. More effective institutions of government increasingly commanded the loyalty, or at least the obedience, of their subjects. In other regions, smaller states predominated. In Italy, for instance, city-states flourished as urban areas grew wealthy and powerful, while the Germans also remained divided among numerous small principalities within the Holy Roman Empire. Europe's multi-centered political system shaped the emerging civilization of the West in many ways. It gave rise to frequent wars that brought death, destruction, and disruption to many communities. These same conflicts enhanced the role and status of military men, and thus European elite society and values were militarized far more than in China, which gave greater prominence to scholars and bureaucrats. Intense interstate rivalry, combined with the willingness to borrow, also stimulated European technological development. By 1450, Europeans had gone a long way toward catching up with their more advanced Asian counterparts. Gunpowder, for instance, was invented in China, but Europeans were probably the first to use it in cannons in the early 14th century, and by the 1500s, they had the most advanced arsenals in the world. Advances in shipbuilding and navigational techniques were provided the foundation for European mastery of the seas. These included the magnetic compass and the stern-post rudder from China, and adaptations of the Mediterranean and Arab lateen sails, which enabled vessels to sail against the wind. The states within this emerging European civilization also differed from those in the East. Their rulers generally were weaker and had to contend with competing sources of power, such as the nobility and the church. Between 1200 and 1450, the Roman Catholic Church was one of the organizations in Western Europe whose influence stretched across the whole region. Its hierarchical organization of popes, bishops, priests, and monasteries meant that the church had a representative in nearly every community in Europe, and Latin provided a shared language among churchmen, even as it gave way to various vernacular languages in common speech. By 1200, the church had grown quite wealthy, possessing large amounts of land, and proceeds of which gave it great power and influence within states, and funded its many religious, charitable, and educational initiatives. The wealth also funded the lavish lifestyles and political aspirations of many leading churchmen, causing reformers to accuse it of forgetting its spiritual mission. Church authorities, rulers, and nobles often competed against each other, for they were rival centers of power, but they were also reinforced each other. Rulers provided protection for the papacy. Oh my gosh! Papacy, and strong encouragement of faith. In return, the church offered religious legitimacy for the powerful and prosperous. It is the will of the Creator, declared the teaching of the church, that the higher shall always rule over the lower. Each individual and the class should stay in its place and perform its tasks. The inability of kings, warrior aristocrats, or church leaders to prevail over the others provided room for urban-based merchants in Europe to achieve an unusual independence from political authority. Many cities where wealthy merchants exercised local power, won the right to make and enforce their own laws and appoint their own officials. Some of them, Venice, Genoa, Florence, and Milan, for example, became almost completely independent city-states. Elsewhere, kings, often in search of allies and resources for their struggles with aristocrats, and the church granted charters that allowed cities to have their own courts, laws, and governments, while paying their own kind of taxes to the king. Powerful, independent cities were... Scared me. Where was I? Something about powerful... Powerful, independent cities were a distinctive feature of European life after 1100 or so. By contrast, the Chinese cities, which were far larger than those of Europe, were simply part of the empire and enjoyed a few special privileges. Although commerce was far more extensive in China than in the emerging European civilization, the powerful Chinese state favored the landowners over merchants and actively controlled and limited merchant activity far more than the new and weaker royal authorities of Europe were able to do. The relative weakness of Europe's rulers allowed urban merchants more leeway, and according to some historians, opened the way to more thorough development of capitalism in later centuries. It also led to the development of representative institutions or parliaments through which the views and interests of these contending forces could be expressed and accommodated. Intended to strengthen royal authority by consulting with major social groups, these embryonic parliaments did not represent the people or the nation, but instead embodied these great estates of the realms. The clergy, the first real estate, the landowning nobility, the second state, and the urban merchants, the third state. In involving European society and economy. In several centuries after 1000, a favorable climate, along with a greater security and stability, brought about a new phase of European civilization, commonly called the High Middle Ages, from 1000 to 13,000, arguably opening the way for an accelerating tempo of economic and social change. The population of Europe grew from perhaps 35 million in 1000 to about 80 million in 1340. Great lords and bishops and religious orders organized new villages on what had been recently forest, marshes, or wasteland. Warmer weather during the summer months had allowed farmers and pastoralists to herd their flocks into previously wild highland regions. As expansions brought new opportunities for settlement, many peasants were able to loosen the shackles of serfdom, a trend facilitated by greater stability and the power of states over local lords. This trend accelerated after 1350 as the terrible loss of life caused by the Black Death created shortages of labor across much of Europe, and those who were still alive could demand lower rents and better wages and conditions. Yep. All right, this should be my last... Oh my gosh, okay. Yeah, I get it. Technological breakthroughs in agriculture underpinned this expansion as Europeans brought new lands under cultivation. They developed a heavy-wheeled plow that could handle the dense soils of northern Europe. They also began to rely increasingly on horses rather than oxen to pull the plow, and to use iron horseshoes and more efficient collar, which probably originated in China or Central Asia. In addition, Europeans developed a new three-field system of crop rotation, which allowed considerably more land to be planted at any one time. These were technological foundations for a more productive agriculture that could support the growing population of European civilization, especially in its urban centers. Far more securely than before, but these developments also took a heavy toll on the environment. For instance, deforestation and the tilling of fields, overfishing, human waste, and proliferation of new water mills and their associated ponds damaged freshwater ecosystems in many places. Lamenting the declining availability of fish, the French King Philip V, or the fourth, one or the other, I think it's the fifth, declared in 1289, today in every river and water side of our realm, large and small, yields nothing. Yep. After 1000, Europeans also began to tap mechanical sources of energy in a major way, revolutionizing production in many industries and breaking with the ancient tradition of depending almost wholly on animal or human muscle as sources of energy. Devices such as cranks, flywheels, camshafts, and complex gearing mechanisms, when combined with windmills and especially water mills, provided power for grinding grain, sieving flour, tanning hides, making beer, sawing wood, manufacturing iron, and making paper. The increased production associated with agricultural expansion and new sources of energy stimulated a considerable growth in long-distance trade, both within Europe and with the more established civilizations of Byzantium and Islam. Thus, the self-sufficient communities of earlier centuries increasingly forged commercial bonds among themselves and with more distant peoples. The population of towns and cities likewise grew. In early 1300s, London had about 40,000 people, Paris had approximately 80,000 people, and Venice, by the end of the 14th century, could boast perhaps 150,000 people. To keep these figures in perspective, Constantinople had some 400,000 people in 1000, and Cordoba in Muslim Spain had about 500,000 at about the same time. And the Song Dynasty capital of Hangzhou had more than 1 million people in the 13th century. These towns gave rise and attracted new groups of people, particularly merchants, bankers, artisans, and university-trained professionals such as lawyers, doctors, and scholars. Many of these groups, including university professors and students, organized themselves into guilds, associations of people pursuing the same line of work, to regulate the professions. So thus, the rural social order of lord and peasant, a new, more productive and complex labor took shape. Thus, from the rural social order of lord and peasant, a new productive and complex division of labor took shape in the European society. These changes, which together represented of the making of new civilization, have implications for the lives of countless women and men. Economic growth and urbanization initially offered European women substantially new opportunities. Women were active in a number of urban professions such as weaving, brewing, milling grain, midwifery, small-scale retailing, laundering, spinning, and prostitution. In 12th century Paris, for example, a list of 100 occupations identified 86 of them as involving women workers, of which 6 were exclusively female. However, much as the economic and technological change of China had eroded female silk production during the Song Dynasty, by the 15th century, artisan opportunities were declining for European women as well. Most women guilds were gone, and women were restricted or banned from many others. The church had long offered some women an alternative home, marriage, family, and rural life. Substantial numbers of women, particularly from aristocratic families, were attracted to the secluded monastic life of poverty, chastity, and obedience within a covenant. In part for the relative freedom from male control that it offered. Here was one of the few places where women might exercise authority as leaders in their orders and obtain a measure of education. But by 1300, oh my goodness, excuse me. But by 1300, much of the independence that such abscesses and their nuns had enjoyed was curtailed, and male control tightened even as older ideas of women intellectual inferiority, the impurity of menstruation, and their role as, I can't say that word, okay. Oh my gosh. As the role of temperatures were mobilized to explain why women must operate under male control. Thus, tightening male control of women took place in Europe as it did in the Song Dynasty, China, at about the same time. Accompanying this new change was an understanding of masculinity, at least in the growing towns. At least in the growing towns and cities. No longer able to function as warriors protecting their women, men increasingly defined themselves as providers. A male role was to brave the new marketplaces to win wealth for himself and his children. Also, I'm sorry about what I said earlier. Obviously, I was just trying to read the empire's name, and literally, like, how in the world are you gonna read that? And also, the reason why I can't read this in particular is not because like anything personal, but literally because this is gonna get posted on YouTube. I can't be saying that stuff on YouTube, or else it won't show up on the the schools, So, geez, we're done. I think, right? 33, 38, we did that. 63, 69, we did that. 30, 33, we did that. 69, 80, we did that. We are good. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Bye.